Well, here we go. Where did the time go? It is time for Now and Next for Wednesday, January the 15th, halfway through the first month of 2025, and oh my goodness, not much to talk about. Thanks for your patience. It's been, I hope you all enjoyed your time off, and a lot has happened, and then again, not a lot has happened. So let's get at it, shall we? We have our cast here, our comms and strategy team for Now and Next, and all have been anxiously waiting in the wings to get back at it because, as I said, no shortage of stuff to talk about. Anne Marie Aikins is here from an Associated Curious Public. Bradley F. Ross, I think, is the appropriate moniker. Is that not it, Brad?
It is. In fact, my middle name does start with F in it.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Does it end in ing?
No, it ends in ick, as in Frederick.
Okay. All right. Bob Reid is here, of course, from Broadway Strategy, and Lindsay Broadhead from Broadhead Communications. And welcome in all. It's just been one of those crazy times where typically we would look at the holiday season and the New Year's transition and all that would be typically a quiet time. And Bob, it has been anything but. I mean, the last time we chatted, Ottawa was on fire. Now it's a dumpster fire in many respects. And Washington is a mess. Just quickly around the table in terms of where do you think we're going to be a month from now, given the uncertainty in Ottawa, and I want to say the certainty, Bob, in Washington?
Yeah, I think we're going to be dealing with the tariffs. All that remains to be seen is what exactly are they going to apply to, and how stiff will the rate be, and will there be any carve-outs like the Premier of Alberta is looking for on oil and gas. But Trump is bound and determined to go ahead with this. We are in a state of chaos at the federal level with multiple people trying to figure out who's in charge or trying to be in charge, particularly among the premiers who started off pretty unified, but now there seem to be a lot of gaps in the armor there. So I think a month from now, we're still going to be in the midst of this. I'm hoping that there might be some greater clarity coming from Ottawa or somewhere else in terms of who is going to be our Captain Canada, who's going to be our point person on this to try and navigate us through.
Yeah, this morning in the Globe and Mail, Brad, that was sort of the context was, why do we have to be so obvious? But we do need an obvious Captain Canada here, and we don't have one. I suggest that has fallen directly on the lap and the desk of the Prime Minister. This has been a mess of his own making. And generally speaking, the people I talk to, just in public circles, etc., normally this wouldn't come up, but oh my God, there's a level of angst all of a sudden around where we're going to be the next 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently there's going to be a cabinet retreat, a federal cabinet retreat, where perhaps Captain Canada will be clarified. I think for now it is kind of falling to, or has fallen to Doug Ford to a certain extent, doing a lot of media in the U.S. as we've seen. I think though the next 3 to 4 months, I think it's kind of pre-season election here in Canada. I think with when the federal Liberal leadership campaign underway, and the field is really narrowing to maybe 2 or 3 for now, maybe more, but Carney and Freeland, maybe it'll be just the 2 of them in the end, and the Conservatives will, their war room will be getting a really good workout, and I think we're going to see a lot of trial balloons, policy type messaging, all of that floated in the next 3 or 4 months before a national election is ultimately called, perhaps at the end of March. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting here. What happens in the U.S., I think Bob said it well. I think we just have to brace and see ultimately what the premiers and the prime minister do in the next few days.
Well, the messaging around this is really interesting from that perspective, though, Anne Marie, because right now, all things being equal, we should have been into the conversation around, the carbon tax election. That is off the table entirely now, only because, as Bob points out, we're going to face these tariffs. Our relationship with the United States is being redefined. So I think, as much and all as I understand why the Tories are just rubbing their hands together, excited about going to the polls, because it suggests they're going to have this overwhelming majority. I think there's some jeopardy in terms of their actual ability to follow through on those numbers, only because the messaging around the election has completely changed. We pulled the rug out from underneath Pierre Poilievre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very true. I'm going to go back to your original question, which is, where do I think we're going to be in a month? So one thing I am certain about is that we'll be in the midst of a Liberal leadership convention and battle over who's going to be the very temporary prime minister. And so that will be fully underway, and we'll be, has already started, but we'll be really in the thick of things before we end up inevitably in a federal election in the few months ahead of that. Whether or not we're into the midst of an Ontario election is yet to be seen. And I get the impression that Doug Ford himself hasn't decided if the population in Ontario really want an Ontario election as well. I think they're kind of sick of elections. So I don't think he's decided. I think his war room has decided they'd like an election right now. But I will tell you, if we're in the midst of an Ontario election, as well as a Liberal leadership campaign, that is, and then followed by a federal election, the staffers, the political staffers that work on these campaigns, because inevitably that's who does it, are going to be stretched very, very thin. So that's a lot going on for them to work on. So I'm not 100% certain about whether or not we'll be in an Ontario election. I hope we're not. But as the gentlemen have rightly said, we'll be fighting the tariffs and fighting whether or not our border security is the right approach and so forth with a new president. And I really hope, I'm crossing my fingers, that Trudeau doesn't decide to say, okay, fuck it, I'm done, and you didn't want me, and I'm going to go away quietly. I hope he steps up over the next few months as the Liberal leadership convention is underway, and he has a clear job to do, which is working with Trump. He's got experience there, and I really hope he takes the lead for that, because I think he can make a difference. All faults aside, however you feel about Trudeau, he did manage Trump effectively the last time, and I think he can do it again.
Yeah, I think he's actually spent that currency. I don't think there's any going back. The toothpaste's out of the tube on that one. I just think, generally speaking, we're not necessarily, Bob, talking about the Liberal Party. We're talking about the party of one, which is Justin Trudeau. And that is the damaged brand. It's not necessarily the Liberals, to be clear.
No, but I still think there needs to be a clear leadership for Canada.
I agree with you there, but that's going to be the monkey chasing the weasel around the mulberry bush, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Trudeau does. Anne Marie has a glimmer there of hope, I guess, in that if Trudeau were to aggressively step up and say, I am still the prime minister until I'm no longer the prime minister, and I am going to lead this battle or this discussion or this process, it's his last shot at redefining his legacy. Mm. Because right now, the narrative around Justin Trudeau's legacy is Canadians got sick and tired of him and showed him the door. That's the end of the Justin Trudeau era, versus Justin Trudeau led the negotiations with Donald Trump and with the U.S. at a critical time in our history. So I could see that being of appeal to Justin Trudeau personally. Whether he does it or not remains to be seen. And Dave, I'm with you. I don't think he has the political capital with Donald Trump to be taken seriously. at all. So I think that train has sailed, in the immortal words of Austin Powers.
well, the just to be clear, as we're recording this, the Prime Minister's meeting with the First Ministers this morning in Ottawa, and what will come out of that, I don't know. I mean, you pointed out, Brad, Doug Ford has taken a front and center approach because he sits at the head of the table of the First Ministers right now, and that's just been a rotating chair for him. I think he's been quite effective in that role. But I posited this morning, and I'll be curious to hear what the other ministers have, the First Ministers have to say about Doug Ford. Last time they met, this was just before Christmas when they had their public meeting. And, Scott Moe and Danielle Smith were gushing about the work that Doug Ford has done. I could be curious to see what the reviews for Doug Ford are like after they come out of this closed door meeting.
Yeah.
And Danielle Smith, I don't think, I think, going down to Mar-a-Lago and having that one-on-one with Trump and Kevin O'Leary, it's all very, very fascinating to me. I think it's a bit, there's a bit of a circus, I think, around all of this, and I'm hopeful then for the sake of this country and what is about to fall upon, I think, the world come next Monday, that the First Ministers and the Prime Minister get their act together and have a very solid strategy going forward. And I agree with Bob and you, Dave. I don't think Trudeau is the one. I don't think Trump will allow that to happen. Frankly, it'll just be more of the same trolling with respect to 51st state and governor and all that bullshit. So, I'm sure they're coming into this meeting today with some sort of a plan, and they just need to hammer it out and all be at least publicly on message. I mean, this is what we here all do, and it's being disciplined around a consistent, clear, concise message, and not all of this, I guess, for lack of a better term, backstabbing that has been happening, and it's actually chest stabbing because, I think we've heard some premiers taking each other on publicly, and I think that needs to end.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay, I know you've been chasing us around the internet. Welcome back.
Thank you. The mere thought of the news last week blew up my entire system, it seems. So I'm back. We've recovered.
So let me suggest to you, though, that, and as they were preparing for this meeting this morning, and I heard all the breathless reporting from Parliament Hill and Ottawa, et cetera, and saying, what will they come out of it with a plan? The premiers, I think, as much and all as we need a Captain Canada, the premiers needed to go into that meeting to say, Prime Minister, this is what we, have decided we are going to do. The First Ministers of this country, we've got 13 people around the table. This is our plan to actually deal with what is within our own lane. And that might be, interprovincial trade barriers, all of the things that pose problems for us in terms of that, how we're going to explore other opportunities for other markets for our energy, et cetera. Because that has to be on the table. We just can't say we're going to have tariffs, but without an alternative to what are we going to do with all that Alberta oil if we don't sell it to the United States? So to me, there has to be a real bold, courageous plan on behalf of the group of First Ministers to put on the table. And then the Prime Minister has to pick it up and run with it.
Yes. I'm not sure where your question is there in terms of should they be more unified. Absolutely. We need a national goal and a national strategy. And comms 101 is you need to row together, right? You can't have a disparate group of individuals, each understandably in the size of this country with disparate priorities. Priority one has to be capital C Canada. Under which all of those provincial leaders who, like them, not like them, they're stepping up to the plate. If the coach fails, you need people on the team to step up. And I think that's what they're doing. But we need a core strategy under which we're all rowing together. Otherwise, the opposition, and in this case, it's not Tories or Liberals, the opposition is Trump, gets to decide who he is brokering a deal with. That is not how this can work. So, in an ideal world, I think what you're getting at is that those premiers come together and put country first. I would like to see that happen, but at the same time, the pressure points are multifaceted. With Ford potentially running, with Danielle Smith having the Western pressures that she would have from the oil and gas community and the disparate nation of our country right now. We've been very separate and segregated as a country. We need this to unify us, and this is the perfect opportunity for message to lead rather than individual actions to lead.
I want to get to the messaging and the leading that's going on at Toronto City Hall, and you all have had your varying degrees of experience with that, but I want to draw on yours, Brad, in terms of the budget, and just clarify for me, because my recollection is that when budgets are being prepared at City Hall, we often, or more often than not, got a sense or a hint of what was in that budget and what was the possible tax increase before Christmas. There were conversations going on well before now, for example, historically. This seems to me that it was a real kind of kabuki show, just in terms of, the veils were being drawn and moved around, and we were guessing at what we were going to get until Shelley Carroll and the mayor actually sat down and said, okay, look, we need 6.9% more, and this is what we're going to be spending our money on.
Well, budget launch, Dave, has traditionally been in January, shortly after Christmas. Certainly, the budget is put together all year. It's a full-time job to do the city budget, but it is launched publicly, typically at this time of year. So the difference, perhaps, over the years is that this is now the mayor's budget. And staff at the senior level, city manager and the CFO, work closely with the mayor's office in terms of what this mayor would be looking at in terms of services and increased services, and therefore what that dollar figure is going to look like, and then ultimately what that budget pressure, what that increase is going to be, or recommended anyway. So they launch it this week. You got a month of discussion. They had a telephone town hall last night for the public. I think there's another one coming up. Very, very effective communications strategy, telephone town halls. We did them when I was at the city during the vaccine campaign. Incredibly effective. It gives the public an opportunity to hear directly and to ask questions directly. And I think, I don't want to beat a dead horse. We've said this many times, and Lindsay knows this just as well as I, that there is no order of government that more closely affects your day-to-day life than the municipal level of government. So it is messy. It is, it's sausage making right out at on the storefront for all to see, unlike the feds in the province, which all happens kind of behind the scenes. So I think we got another month of this. I think it goes to council mid-February. So none of it surprised me, what I heard this week.
Well, but except, and I also think, though, that historically watching what went on, I agree with you that it gets officially launched in January. But there were telltale as early in some cases as November on some calendar years where they were saying, we're looking at this kind of an increase. And it might have been just because, John Tory would say, whatever we're going to do, we're not going to have anything above the rate of inflation.
Yeah. At or about the rate of inflation. At about the rate of inflation is thrown out the door now. Certainly with this.
Oh, no, I get that.
Yeah, but I just want to add though. So there's some discipline there. This is the mayor's budget now. So this isn't budget making by committee. This is the mayor's budget that she will present to council. And I think I want to make a point here about the mayor of Toronto, whether it's Olivia Chow, John Tory, or anybody else, is directly elected by more people than any other politician in this country, including the prime minister and the premier. So she has a mandate. And so working behind the scenes and being disciplined around messaging perhaps is what we're seeing now.
Well, she may have a mandate, but let's face it, voter turnout is, we can get in down in the weeds on in terms of what that, what that actually
yeah,
means. But I hear you. Yeah. But at the same time, I think the transparency is what's critical here, Lindsay. And a year ago, when we talked about the budget that Olivia Chow presented was 9+% in terms of a tax increase. Now we're looking at almost 7%. That's a significant jump over 2 years. And the question you can ask, I think fairly, is, are we better off vis-a-vis the services that we are expecting to get from City Hall, whether it's police, garbage, water, whatever it might be? And I don't know. I don't see. She talked in her news conference. These are things that are going to make a difference to Torontonians now. I don't see it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And I mean, for transparency, I was working at the city at this time last year, so I did a lot of work speaking about the budget last year. That was highly unique. So everything I'm going to say has been on, it's in the public sphere. Last year was interesting because I think Olivia Chow clearly articulated, as did the city, frankly, a desire for a New Deal. And they were very good at articulating the pressure points on any municipal environment, particularly the City of Toronto, that we were on deck for spending and being accountable for spending at a rate that was far higher than the money that was coming in. And the money that was coming in, there were so few tools to acquire it. It usually only came in, we're seeing this now, through folks who owned homes and housing related taxes. So last year was different in my mind for a couple of reasons. First of all, they affiliated very well the budget with an ask, and that was the New Deal to both the federal and provincial governments. And they were very successful. There was uploading of the Gardner. There were one-time payments for different things that were supposed to right-size the budget in a real way. So I think Chow, certainly Councillor Carroll, have taken a lead in defining this period of time as being a readjustment for the future. And I think in terms of legacy, if I'm going to guess, that is ironically what Mayor Chow is looking for. I say ironically, of course, because she affiliates herself with the NDP, and this is a more fiscal drive. There was another difference, though, and that was that the ask was around an example of homelessness in particular, and the increase of immigration that was coming in. And we could point to something very, very clearly and say, we're spending more for something that is a federal file. This year is interesting because it's gone up, but there's no New Deal conversations that I've seen, and there's nothing to point to, partly because Ottawa and Ontario could both be imploding politically, but there's no one to ask and there's no one to point to. So I think actually the message discipline is quite hollow this year because of circumstances, but also because there isn't that immediacy. Plus, final point, the reality of people's pocketbooks post-inflation, post-bank rate increases is completely and utterly different than it was a year ago. So there's a completely different message environment in which this government is working.
Well, Anne Marie, when we look at it, though, and the mayor keeps trying to convince me that she's making life more affordable for me here in the city of Toronto. The average tax rate has gone up almost 17% in less than 18 months.
Well, and I think we've forgotten that Tory's last budget, it went up 7%. I think it was about 7%.
Yeah.
So in the last 3 years, the taxes have gone up significantly, property taxes for homeowners. And perhaps we're still playing catch up. Perhaps we're still one of the lowest paying municipalities in Ontario, but the reality is it's gone up that much. So 7%, over 9%, and then 7% again. So I think people have been paying more. And I think overall, because I don't have any insight like Brad and Lindsay do on the making of the sausage for the budget, but I think they could use some new messaging. For example, I think they said last year, and they've said it again this year, that we are going to see our lives are going to improve with this budget. And that didn't happen last year, or at least that's what most people feel, that things didn't get better for them. Their TTC didn't get better. Their expenses from day to day didn't get better. They got worse. So I think that's what people are feeling. So when somebody says to me, this budget will fix the problems, and then they're disappointed by that's the end result. They'll be disappointed. So we're over promising that this is going to fix their problems. Number two, I think they're not talking about their own efficiencies, where they're going to, as much as we hate to hear that word, especially as public servants, where they're going to find their own efficiencies that they're asking most of us to find in our daily lives. So they're not doing that. And I think the third and final message I have for them is, I think the New Deal is misunderstood or not well understood by most people. Most residents don't know what that means. And each time it said we have a new deal, it sounds like that's final, that now we have a great deal and a better deal, and things will be better because of it. But then the next year we're looking for another new deal. And so I think it's overused and misunderstood. And so we need to figure out another way to talk about how we're going to get the other governments to pay their fair share.
Anne Marie, you're absolutely right. The New Deal was never done, right? The New Deal got a couple of ticks in that box, and important ticks, but it was never sealed. And I'm surprised that this year, the municipalities, because there's been good headway and from other mayors and other jurisdictions partnering in as well to get that done, and it just hasn't moved forward.
But we've suggested, I think that the city's suggested that I've gotten a new deal. Tori,
I totally agree with you.
I remember David
no new deal
saying it. They all got a new deal, and that was going to fix our problem. So I think that's it. They need a much more strategic, innovative, new kind of communication plan to convince me as a homeowner, as a resident in Toronto, as a person that uses the TTC almost daily, that as a driver, that things are actually going to get better, how they're going to get better. So that's a tough deal.
To complicate things further, Bob, we're still $1 billion in the hole after this tax increase. And again, a lot of that goes back to what we've already alluded to, and these are programs that other governments should be and are responsible for. But that number, and again, it's not as big as it was last year, but it's still $1 billion that we don't have, that we still need to account for, because you can't run a deficit.
Yeah, the City Hall's in a tough spot on a couple of points, and that is one. There has been some significant progress made on the balance sheet, but it's still a deep hole. And the bigger problem they've got is a lack of clarity, a lack of, I would say, theme. There's no theme to this budget. There's no narrative to this budget.
Yeah.
There's no answer to, you're going to pay more again, but you're going to get this as a result. They need some kind of tangible, shiny thing, dare I say, that they could point to answer that question. As Anne Marie and others have raised, it's, what am I getting for this? You keep telling me this is going to change my life as a resident of this city and as a taxpayer in this city. How? And I'm not hearing the answer to that. I'm not seeing the answer to that. I think the closest they might have come, and I think it was a badly timed announcement, was, and this isn't the be all end all, but it's an example, is 20 plus traffic wardens that they're going to deploy downtown to try and break up the gridlock and make sure people don't block the box and stuff like that. Okay, that's tangible. I get that. If I'm trying to drive in and out of downtown and I see bodies on the street making sure the traffic flows, okay. And if I was told that in the wake of the tax increase announcement, in the wake of the budget getting finalized, then there'd be something tangible they could point to and say, you see, this is one of the measures that we're taking thanks to your tax dollars in action to be able to make life better for you. Again, that's a micro example, but they need more of that. They need real tangible things they can point to so that people will go, oh, that's where my money's going. And the challenge they have is where so much of the money is going is into invisible soft services, into invisible supports for low-income people to help tenants and renters. They're all noble things, but you can't point a camera at them. And that's the big communications challenge that City Hall has.
But
they have a
point, though. I think the issue, though, Brad, is that when they have done that, and they've done it with the traffic cops or the folks who are making sure we've got the marshals in the intersections, we're going to extend library hours and swimming pool hours. Again, that I love the idea around it, but it doesn't hit me where I live.
Well, that's but and they're freezing TTC fares and increasing service. That is not cheap. And extending library hours and pool hours and doing all of those things costs money. And as we said earlier, Olivia Chow has a mandate. She has a mandate as the mayor of the city, elected by more people than any other. And you can talk about voter turnout, but do not complain about tax increases if you didn't vote. So I'll just leave that there. But I think we've talked for years about how we kept taxes low and at the above at the rate or below the rate of inflation, and then we complain about housing and homelessness and traffic and TTC and all of these things. So we throw money at it. The tangibility of that, I guess, is going to take some time, and I think. I don't know if I'm sure that there is a narrative and story that is being developed. The budget was just launched. I think I want to keep my powder dry. Yes, I'm the former chief communications officer of the city of Toronto, as was Lindsay. And so I am loath to, and perhaps this is a declaration of a bit of a conflict, to criticize my former colleagues in the communications division at the City of Toronto, but I know them and I know how hard they work, and I've seen the efforts on social media to get messaging out about all of this. The fact that it's not hammering us every day with headlines and in our social feeds perhaps speaks to what's going on elsewhere in this country and south of the border as well. So and in Los Angeles and everywhere else. So there's a lot of competition for airtime, and I think I'll put this out there as well. I think it's important for the community, for residents of the city to inform themselves about what the city budget is all about and what it's doing, because it's, we talk about new deals. Well, what does that mean? Don't know. You're uploading the Gardiner and the DVP. Perhaps the budget increase would have been much higher if that upload didn't occur. Maybe it hasn't occurred yet. I'm not sure. Lindsay suggested that it hasn't happened yet, so I don't know if the city's still paying for those things or not. But
no, the upload
legislation. I'm told they passed the legislation to do the upload of the Gardiner and the DVP.
Yes.
But
mind you, that's capital. So anyway,
absolutely, yeah. But let me suggest then The people, oddly enough, who are cheering for this budget from the comms perspective would seem to be front and center is Brad Bradford, because he's just going to put all this in his pipe and smoke it as he presents his plans to run against Olivia Chow in the next election, Anne Marie. And the thing, but sort of to Brad's point, even with the coverage of what's going on at City Hall, you would think that there were only 3 members of council: the mayor, John Burnside, and Brad Bradford, because nobody else seems to have a voice or is seen in any media coverage of what's going on vis-a-vis City Hall.
Well, I think it's because they have a critical voice, so that's why they get the attention of the airways. If you don't have a critical voice, it's very hard for councillors to get any kind of attention. And yeah, he has someone always emerges as the opposition kind of leader. And Bradford has bounced a few others off that, some of us are glad to see aren't getting as much airwaves. But I think there are other strong voices. Like I think Shelley Carroll does a tremendous job, and she has been the voice of the annual budget for the city through different mayors. So you got to give her credit. She can adjust to different administrations, and she has adjusted from a Tory administration to an Olivia Chow administration. That and she's done it very admirably. So she is a regular voice out there, and she's a regular on a News Talk and on other radio stations. So I see her as a real voice of reason, and she does tell a fairly strong narrative when it comes to the budget, and as a very clear voice on not just the budget, but many other different issues. So I think that's fairly typical that only a few get the majority of the airways, but that's the media. They don't want a whole bunch of people to line up say this is a wonderful budget.
Well,
but they want someone else to say it's a shitty budget.
The gallery ain't what it used to be down there. Let's face it, Bob.
Right.
And just in terms of being able to do a scrum while a meeting was going on at the top of the gallery, that was normal. Now it's there's just not the presence of the media at City Hall that there used to be. I mean, that's the harsh reality.
Yeah, that's happening everywhere. And Anne Marie, of course, they've got to present balance in the reporting as well. So you're not going to have a line of people all in favor, all on one side of an issue. That's why you need the Brad Bradfords. You need the opposition voices, as you say, and they do emerge over time. I mean, Rob Ford used to be that guy, way back when. So that's part of the natural ebb and flow of the coverage. But I do agree with Brad that it's become so narrow focused on a handful of key voices when it's a much bigger council. And let's remember, there's the last election saw the biggest influx of new councillors in quite some time, if not in the city's history. And we're not seeing those voices emerge. It seems to be the usual suspects rather than here's a new voice, here's somebody we haven't been familiar with because they haven't been elected that long, but boy, they got some things to say. I'd like to see more of that.
When we get to that point, though, Brad, and we talk about this budget and we talked about, 7%, 9%, 7%, I've heard the speculation being the mayor is just setting herself up so that next year she can come in and have something that resembles close to inflation and look at how well we've done and how terrific it is. On paper, that makes sense. I keep coming back to what have you done for me lately? So this year is going to be critical for her if, in fact, she intends to run again for the mayor's chair.
Sure. I mean, politics is politics. I mean, God knows. I mean, we were trying to speculate on what's going to happen in the next month, never mind, the next 23 months. I think, though, that Olivia Chow has also in this budget has managed to avoid a very public fight with the Toronto Police Service. Shelley Carroll was just appointed, by the way, chair of the Police Services Board. So I think what we're seeing is some message discipline. I really do. You're going to have Bradford and Burnside and others. Perhaps we'll hear more from Stephen Holiday as well about being critical around this budget. But I think in the wings in the next month, I think we'll see the Gord Perks and the Amber Morleys and others who are supportive, who vote who vote with Mayor Chow. We'll see them come out and at local community meetings and all the rest of it. Means, city politics is very, very local. I mean, just not to overstate the obvious. And there's only, as we talked about, there's only so much airtime. There's only so much ink that's going to be spilled on a little community meeting somewhere where a local councillor makes some really good points about what this budget's going to do. So, I guess in the end, Dave, she's Chow is perhaps laying some foundation for 2026, and being able to point at those things that we're talking about here that I'm hearing some say that we haven't show show me the fruits of this labor. It does take some time. It does take some time for those fruit trees to grow. When pool hours are going to be open longer, as the summers get hotter, as libraries become available on Sundays when they weren't before, when somebody doesn't have to dig a little bit deeper into their pocket to get on the TTC, when we see service increases, then I think you'll be able to point to those things. Or is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I think I believe that there would absolutely be a strategy to all of this.
Just a shout out vis-a-vis our, without sounding like we're crapping all over the media, because the folks who are covering City Hall are working their asses off, and I get that. But I want to give a shout out to the folks at Toronto Today at Village Media. It's a new upstart. Village Media has been around for a long time in terms of some of the communities they've been in, but they launched in Toronto, I guess, back in, I want to say October or November, in the fall anyway. And if you haven't, check it out. I mean, they do a really good job at covering what happens in downtown Toronto. If you want to know what's going on in Scarborough, look at something else. But they've done a very good job, and I was skeptical at first in terms of how can you do this when just kind of confine yourself to those borders. But they've done some really good reporting on really local issues. Things like new developments down on Lower Spadina and that kind of thing that doesn't necessarily get covered in some of the larger media outlets. So well done there. Now, before we go, you've all in your own worlds had to deal with crises, whether it's been the GO train stuck in a flooded Don Valley, Anne Marie, or whatever the situation might have been that just flares up, and whether it is as a result of some kind of act of God or act of nature, as the case may be. I'm just curious to get each of you, your take on what's going on in Los Angeles. I mean, the horror of seeing the wildfires is one thing. To see entire communities burned to the ground is something else. Brad, you talked about, all of this politics is local. And while we're watching it from around the world, what's going on there, and we can all talk about climate change and we can argue one way or the other, what it's doing and contributing to that. It has put, I think, an unfair or perhaps an unnecessary expectation around some of the local politicians or the local authorities who are having to manage a situation that's way beyond their scope of what their jobs are actually called on to do.
Yeah, I'm loath to be overly critical, but there was an interview with the fire chief, Los Angeles, not Los Angeles County, but the city of Los Angeles fire chief. And it was one of those it was a live interview in her office. And the reporter asked her 3 times, because of water shortages, did the city fail you? Did your colleagues basically fail you? And ultimately she said yes. Now maybe that's full marks for honesty. But I think that was probably maybe perhaps one of the last interviews she'll ever do as the fire chief of Los Angeles. She went on to say that she's not unsure how the water gets to the fire hydrants. And it was just a remarkably poor interview. Now, perhaps she's tired, overworked, stressed. I get all of that. But as a leader, as the fire chief for the second largest city in the country, I would have hoped that she would have been far better prepared. And all of us, on this, the 4 of us anyway, on this podcast, have worked with leaders and prepared leaders for crises and in the midst of crises and post-crises. And yeah, you have some you step in it from time to time, but God, I got to tell you, that was painful to watch. And so, Godspead to them all. But
just to be clear, I'm the one who just got to throw the snowballs. You guys had to evade them, so I get all that. Anne Marie, though, there's this tendency in these news conferences, and I understand to some degree why it happens, where you've got, the speaker, whether it's the mayor or the fire chief, and then you've got 30 people standing behind the podium. And a lot of that to me is performative. I'm not quite sure how that actually helps me understand the story any better. Now, if it's somebody who's dealing with something very specific about the emergency response, I get it. But there's a lot of people standing around there, and the message to me is, what the hell are you doing? It's like watching the guys at the construction site lean on the shovel.
Yeah, frankly, I never really liked that approach, but politicians often do, leaders often do, they flank themselves. And then as a viewer, I get obsessed with looking at their faces, because sometimes, especially when Trump would speak and he'd have all these people behind him, and I would get very entertained by some of their faces when people would, raise their eyebrows or laugh or scoff or whatever. Anyways, I never recommended that approach. But I must say, in the last few years, crisis communicators, which is, there's very few people that are expertly skilled in it. Some people have moderate skills in them, and some people don't have any skills in it at all. But crisis communicators are really facing unprecedented challenges today for a variety of reasons, but mostly because real-time misinformation, thanks to AI, thanks to social media and all the changing social media constantly, it spreads faster than we can ever imagine, faster than those wildfires. And we've seen that happen in LA. The misinformation has spread. Crime has been able to exploit that misinformation, criminals, and adapting to that requires exceptional planning and exceptional skills. So that's a tough one. And they have, there's been some missteps, no doubt, in LA. But whether it's the leadership, whether it's the real-time information, whether it's the lack of preparedness by the spokespeople, but overall, I don't envy the crisis communicators for them. Like, how do you even decide today what digital platforms are we going to use to get out the information to people really quickly? The last time I managed a full-scale crisis in my job, there were certain platforms that we used, and it got out information quickly. But now there are so many different platforms that people are all on, that how do you get on those platforms and have the audiences? It's pretty tough. And also, my final comment is people are demanding very innovative content delivery solutions that you have to be really on top of. You really have to have skilled people on your teams and prepared. But all this, hopefully, when this tragedy is finally over, they look at that and look at the lessons learned in this tragedy and teach us all about how they coped throughout this unprecedented, horrific challenge.
Lindsay, the challenge here is, I can see where, this is something that happens in the moment, and that's why it's a crisis. Mm-hmm. But it's not like urban wildfires are new to Southern California, one. Two, things like getting alerts out to people to say, get out of your house, or evacuation routes, etc. It sounds to me, based on the reporting I've seen, is in many cases, that's where a lot of the preparation fell down. It wasn't necessarily how well they were versed in the messaging. It was the mechanics, the logistics of actually getting the word out in an effective way. To what Anne Marie was saying. But there were people who were saying, I got a message to say, get out of my house. And then a half an hour later, I got another message. Oh, no, never mind. That didn't apply to you.
Right. Yeah. Well, they do have a lot of fires. Absolutely. But I think we can agree that the size and the scope and the speed and the conditions of this one is fairly unprecedented, and not expected. However, any good crisis communicator who would be leading, and it would be operations, in fact, not communications, but operations would have considered this. I don't know why certain systems didn't work in different instances. That's frankly inexcusable. This period of time in a crisis is all about action, right? It's telling people specifically what to do, when, and how. And I imagine in most cases it's move, get out now. So there can't be any middling around that at all. So I don't really have much more to add to that, because this phase is, they're not worrying about framing. Anne Marie's point that I have been following around misinformation is fascinating. The images around the Hollywood sign on fire, or the politicalization of where the waters come from and the availability, is really detrimental and sad that politics is playing a role in that, and that will give first responders something else to fight. But otherwise, these systems in play that get people to make a certain action or do a certain thing is all that's happening right now. And that should be front of mind.
Lindsay just hit on two things that I wanted to bring up, and that is the disinformation. Shame on whoever is using AI to create images of the Hollywood sign in flames, of the Griffith Observatory in flames, because they're so real looking, those video clips, that they're utterly terrifying, and they're completely detrimental to the efforts that need to be made. So that's one. And then the politicization. I mean, for God's sake, is the new White House going to take Donald Trump's social media feed away from him? Because for him to be crapping on the governor of California in his hour of need, at a time when you need to see the senior levels of government working together and working cooperatively, no, he takes it right into the gutter. It was absolutely shameful to see that from not only the incoming president, but all of the sycophants around him. I found that really disheartening.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, and it kind of leads us back to where we started, and what the hell can we expect in the coming weeks or months? And I think we're getting a taste of all of that. Listen, it's good to see y'all in the new year, and good to get things up and launched. And we'll be back at it again in a couple of weeks here on Now and Next with Anne Marie Aikins, Brad Ross, Lindsay Broadhead, and Bob Reid. And by the way, if you want to follow along on YouTube, we are there. You can subscribe to the channel, and you can see if you're watching. I got the Gumby up here. This is one of the things that the kids gave me, so I insisted on including it in my in the studio. And also, we can listen on any of the podcast apps, whether it's Apple, Spotify, iHeart, etc. And you can always leave us a message. So if you got something to say about the show that you agree or disagree with in terms of what we had to say, feel free to leave us a comment. Well, that'll do it for us this week on Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Aaron Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.